Ian Ventham, former SDA and Torships Youth Trust trustee, member of the board from 1996 to 2003 or 4. I got involved through two things. Firstly, I was a sailor, am a sailor, and I had been heavily involved in sail training, principally through the army, having run a sail training yacht for a couple of years when I was instructor at Sandhurst, and thereafter being a skipper of that yacht many years on as a civilian, taking bunches of Sandhurst cadets away for a week or 2 weeks at a time. In 1996, I was the Director of Fundraising at the RNLI. My colleague George Cooper, Commodore George Cooper, was a trustee of the Sail Training Association. George was the Operations Director at the RNLI, and he was responsible for the operation of the schooners at board level for the STA. The STA was beginning to face the issue of replacements for the schooners, and as ever, the SDA was concerned about whether it could make enough money. It has had, and I suspect probably still does, struggle with generating enough income to sustain the sail training work. George asked me if I would be prepared to help at the SDA. I was, and I became a board member with a particular responsibility for trying to develop a fundraising strategy for the SDA. I have to say, I think I probably failed fairly abysmally in persuading the board that a fundraising strategy was necessary, and even if it was necessary, how we should do it. And the SCA continued at that time its normal business plan, which usually led to a deficit every year. Its normal business plan of trying to achieve enough income from selling places on the schooners, principally to young people, of course, in pursuit of its mission, but also to adults in order to generate income. And whilst we had some fundraising successes, I don't believe we ever really developed a proper articulated fundraising strategy, and certainly the STA never invested enough, in my view, in the fundraising process to sustain it. There were no formal subcommittees on the board, but there were certainly sectional interests, and the most powerful bit was the ship operating bit, as it were. The finance bit and the fundraising bit, most definitely not as powerful as the people who were concerned with running the ships, which is not surprising. There were a lot of ship brokers, people of that sort on it, people who had a maritime background, and the whole emphasis, I found, was really not at that level, at board level, on the development of young people through sail training, which I felt very strongly should be the mission of the SCA, and was probably its written mission, but I think the board felt itself far more to be a ship operating company that sent young people off to sea, possibly with a view to them going into marine careers thereafter. I'm sure that was not reflected at schooner level. I think at schooner level, people very clearly saw that their role was the development of young people, but it was slightly anomalous, very anomalous, that the board, I think, did not feel that was its mission. So I did spend quite a bit of time with other colleagues on the board getting that mission articulated well over the next 2 or 3 years into a mission which said that the purpose of the mission of the STA is the development of young people through the medium of sail training. So sail training became a medium rather than an object in its own right. We were distracted for several years, 2 or 3 years, by the people who were involved in the races, a separate group within the board, who wanted to split off and form...
Just the tall ships races you were talking about?
Tall ships races, who wanted to split off and be a separate organisation, and did not see that the SDA's historical role as both running schooners and running the races was viable. With hindsight, I think they're right. although I fought it at the time. I think it was a clear and proper decision to separate those two bits into races on the one hand, STA on the one hand, and what became the Tall Ships Youth Trust on the other. However, in doing that, of course, the Tall Ships Youth Trust, as it became, faced some severe financial difficulties. In making the decision that the schooners were coming to the end of their economic life, the decision was taken to buy 2 hulls that were made and laid up in Poland, I think.
Yes, Poland.
And they were brought over and fitted out by the, still at that stage, the SDA, at quite considerable expense. The big issue was, of course, that generated far more berths on the 2 new ships than had been on the 2 schooners. And despite the difficulties that there had always been of filling the berths on the schooners, nobody foresaw the difficulties of filling the berths,
even more berths
on the ships. And the business model, once again, took a hit. Although the capital cost was covered by major donations, largely the running costs thereafter, of course, were horrendous. Particularly because they required more permanent staff, paid permanent staff, and that was a huge hit. Also, that was compounded, I think, by the difficulty it was found in getting enough young people at the right times of the year. Very hard to get young people, whether young people who would just sign up or whether young people who were themselves disadvantaged at the right times of the year. They were generally only available not in term time and not at exam time. So the business model was developed to sell the spaces during the rest of the year to adults to make money. Absolutely fine, nothing wrong with that. And during the key periods, the summer and so on, to sell it to the target audience. But that then created difficulty that if you weren't very careful, you're operating out of balance, and more was being done to satisfy the adult market than was being done to satisfy the charitable market, if you like, the young people. So the split, on the one hand, between the STA and what became Tall Ships Youth Trust, the difficulties of developing a good business model all led to severe problems, which meant that in 2001, 2002 perhaps, Tall Ships Youth Trust, as it became, was facing a severe financial crisis. In fact, we were down to 2 or 3 weeks of
running money,
sufficient income, which certainly made those of us who were trustees quite concerned.
An interesting question now, how was that overcome? By memory, no details required.
I think it was overcome by huge stringencies, cutting costs, putting the ships into the management company, so outsourcing the management. I think initially a loan that was then made a conditional grant by
Andrew Salverson?
Andrew Salverson, which helped us through the difficulty.
Have we ever had lottery funding for these things at all?
I think lottery funding was applied for. Whether it was successful, I don't remember.
In the initial build, Sport England put in a chunk of money.
You're right. You're absolutely right. That was the other big chunk, I think, that went into the capital costs.
Yes, but not the running costs.
But not the running costs. So 2002-ish, Tall Ships Youth Trust emerged, I think, with a much clearer mission. It understood that its mission was the development of young people through the medium of sail training. A better business model, certainly some severe economies in how the ships were being run, the new ships, but still without, in my view, a coherent fundraising strategy. It was insufficient being invested in that side of the business. That led to the 2 ships. However, the 2 ships proved unsustainable, and one was subsequently sold, and the present business model of yachts on the one hand and one of the tall ships continues.
What fundraising ideas did you have to put towards the board, which may still be valuable today? Please.
I mean, in any fundraising strategy, you have to decide what what opportunities are there and how you're going to exploit them. And but the first thing, though, you need to do, I think, is to bring in a professional fundraiser to develop that. Although I was a professional fundraiser, I had to be very careful about my conflict of interest.
Oh yes, yes.
Working for the RLI and also trying to manage things with the SCA. Whilst the chief exec did a really good job trying to fundraise, and there was nothing wrong with the effort she made, it was a secondary part of a job against the primary task of being chief executive. The SCA at that stage was very keen to develop a branch model, a volunteer model, similar to the RLI's. I think in the 21st century, just not sustainable.
It's a bit different being on land and being on a boat.
Well, I think that's true, but it was more societal, as you said just now. The alternative things that are there, the alternative distractions. People are less and less willing to engage with any kind of voluntary activity, whether it's Rotary or
I think it's a cultural thing as well. I think when you were brought up and the way I was brought up, that's what you did.
But with so many distractions, I think the better way to engage people is individually, and technology enables you to do that, and engage people as donors. That requires investment in a marketing activity, direct marketing activity,
and specific to
and somebody who can specifically run it with a good database and so on. And certainly that's the way the RLI has gone. The branch and guild structure is still there, and it's still important. But it's become of lesser importance over the years as the individuals become more and more important, and also more emphasis on trusts and grant giving foundations and so on. But that all required a more professional structure within the organisation, which is it has never allowed, the board has never allowed, in my view, Torchlight Youth Trust or previously the SCA to invest properly in that fundraising activity.
Quick question back to the branches, which you mentioned a few minutes ago. Can you remember that there were many local branches still left by 1996?
Not very many.
Compared with what you believe there were before?
Well, I don't know.
No, what was there for,
I mean, I think there was a very strong branch in Liverpool. There were a number of groups around. There was a group in Poole, I know. But it all tended to rely on
volunteers.
Well, they would rely entirely on volunteers, but whereas the RLI and other major charities had a regional network of staff supporting those branches of guilds and sustaining them, the SCA had none.
Which is one reason why probably they withered and died, because there's no one interested in
professional support.
Because certainly by the year 2002, don't hold me to it, the local branches, according to accounts, were still raising £500,000 a year in totality. But last year it's down to £30,000.
Yeah, sure.
But it gives intriguing you mentioned that, because therefore I'm assuming that before 1996, at the stage when Simon and I went on, there were truly listed about 40 local branches, and some significantly did send an awful lot of young adults. Most of us were sent by a local branch.
Then I think that which introduces another interesting dilemma. Was the purpose of those branches to find young people who could benefit from the mission of the SCA, or was the purpose of those branches to raise money to support them, or was it a bit of both? Poole branch, I have to say, did both, and when one of my sons wanted to go on the schooners, Poole branch very kindly, very generously sponsored him. Now, would Poole branch have raised that money anyway for the SCA, or was it the fact that they were generating money for a particular person who lived near Poole that made them raise that money?
So, in your own personal, so subjective opinion, what do you believe we used to do as short-term outcomes for young adults back in the day? How different were they after day one?
I cannot
off the ship.
Okay, I cannot speak from personal experience because I never actually went on a schooner on a sail training trip. I did go on schooners last time, but not on a sail training trip. But I can speak from my experience of sail training on. And I think the interesting thing for me is that You can take somebody who is apparently very self-confident, apparently very worldly wise, apparently very much up for it, and you put them in an environment which is completely outside their normal experience, frighten the pants off them, and they become a very different person.
Officer cadets from Sandhurst, obviously your cup of tea.
But suddenly they realise that unless you operate as a team, you can't get things done, that you have to rely on other people for food, safety, or anything else.
So you have to communicate in a certain way to them.
Absolutely. That there are times when it's right that you're ordered to do something or yelled at because of an emergency, rather than being asked politely, or indeed you have the ability to ignore something when other people are relying on you. And I think that has a profound effect on people's thought processes. The problem is that if you happen to go on a very benign week's cruise or 2 week cruise, it may be a lot of fun, but you don't necessarily learn those things, so it can be a bit hit and miss. And I find it quite hard to know whether you have genuinely changed a person's outlook. I think in the short term, the friendships that are built and the teamwork that's built on, so I'm sure has an immediate effect. Whether the long-term impact is there or not, I personally couldn't say, but I think that more needs to be done to try to investigate that.
Yes, yeah, at least the research needs to be required.
See whether that is true or not.
Which leads interesting to another question, because as I know, you sent your own children on these ships. You put your money where your mouth is and put the lives of your children in potential danger on the high seas.
Well, I think the potential danger, it may appear very frightening to kids who are put into who had no previous experience. Of course, the reality is that it's not actually that dangerous, and the perception is it can be dangerous. Yes, all my children were interested in sailing. We had done a certain amount of sailing together as a family. I felt, they felt that they would benefit from going on sail training yachts. I can't remember now which way round it is, but one went at least twice or even 3 times on the schooners, and one went at least once. I can't remember which child did both. The interesting outcome for both of them is that, directly or indirectly, they met their future partners through.
Really?
Yeah. David, my son, who lives just over the way here.
Oh, does he? We can get him later.
Didn't meet his wife on tour ship, but he met a girl called Claire, who was the best friend of his now wife. So he was introduced through a mutual acquaintance on the schooner. Andrew, my son, lives up in Scotland, who is actually, as it happens, an RMI volunteer. Met Jenny on a cruise, on sail training, on one of the schooners. So
he was probably the one that went 3 times.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it was actually. I think it was
Yeah.
Andrew.
Didn't be that lucky once off. Yeah.
And I felt it was a benefit to them. I mean, they were good middle class kids, if you like, and not particularly difficult or troublesome or in any way off the rails, but I felt it would help them grow up and mature and
good experience.
Yeah. And of course, if you want to take children, kids, adults with problems, you can't just have a crew full of kids with problems. There has got to be a mix of both for the wonderful heady mixture of sail training to work. So you know, but it must be very careful not to become just a
problem fixer.
Well, not, on the one hand, a problem seen as a problem fixer.
Yeah.
On the other hand, a wonderful cruising experience in the Azores for middle class kids who can afford to go.
Yeah.
There was in the, I think, sort of late 90s, Dunedin University in New Zealand undertook a research programme. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Yeah,
The
there's
results of which I don't now remember.
there's quite a few over and above that lying about. Some available on the internet because with a great internet, all information should be shoved there.
Sure.
Very few people read it, of course. Only, well, me, I think.
I mean, absolutely nothing to do with cell training.
No, carry on.
But it is interesting. This past weekend, I said I've just had a sort of 50-year-on reunion. In 1966, 22 of us turned up at Sandhurst in my platoon. There were several hundred of us across the academy, and it's fascinating. 2 of them were ex-soldiers. 2 were from overseas, 1 from Saudi Arabia, 1 from Ghana. The remainder of us were a mixture of public school boys, grammar school boys.
Just for the camera, which school did you go to?
I went to Portsmouth Grammar School.
Very much.
And what was really, I mean, it was fascinating. Chucked together very, very tough first 6 weeks. And all these bloody public school boys, they fitted in easily because that was not dissimilar to what they had.
Well, we had something called CCF at boarding school too.
And some of us, I've been in the CCF, were quite adept at some of the military things like pulling boots. Others hadn't got a clue what they were doing.
Go on, you were cadet CSM or cadets RSM at least.
Chucked together. Chucked together into Sandhurst for 2 years. We've emerged 50 years on, despite. I mean, one memorable thing we all remembered. One of our sergeant majors, one of our numbers was a chap called Peter Walker-Oker, who was going into the household cavalry. And dear old company sergeant major Dan Fogarty, Coldstream Guards, on one memorable occasion said, "I suppose somebody like you, sir, coming from the background you do, I expect you live in a place called Oak Overall, don't you?" Well, actually, sir, yes. And he did. He lived in Oak Overall, owned half of bloody Derbyshire. So we had, at one end we had that, at the other end we had dear old Harry Bees, good mate of mine, lives just down the road, who was a police constable's son and a soldier who came to Sandhurst, and everything in between. And it's a good leveller, wonderful. And in a lesser way, more condensed way, cell training has that similar impact. To do things together. I think that's the point about cell training actually, is that it's probably for the vast majority of the kids who go on it a completely foreign environment. I think that's what's different about it.
I think that's what takes them out of their comfort zone.
Absolutely.
If you're on land and you have to do,
something
outward bound, you're still on land. You can walk home and call mum.
Yeah, sure.
If you're in the middle of the the North Sea, right, you've got a mobile phone, but you ring mum, she's going to say, well,
tough.
What am I going to do? I haven't got a helicopter.
This is one of an interesting question. This is only subjective, but compared with Outward Bound, I would comment is the fact that we're all in the same boat and you can't go home.
I did Outward Bound. I did at the age of 18. For various reasons, I went on an Outward Bound course before joining the army, just before, in North Wales. Good experience. I mean, 2 weeks of being forced to work with a team of people, to go on an expedition with them and so on. But I think you're right that it's not as foreign an environment.
It's not taking you out of
being dumped on a boat.
It's not. All right, let's go.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Leave this man. It's been brilliant. Really good. Really good. No, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, it's a complete. From this point of view, it's the history of the Sail Training Association, and part of the history is people like you.